Hey there, Cheesemeisters. That would have been Concrete Jungle by Sway and King Tech. That is the song playing when Brandon drives down to Tamale Heaven, and you can tell that he's crossed over into the bad part of town, quote unquote, because rap music starts playing.
It's a choice.
It is, and this episode is full of choices.
Yes.
I am Jeff, and I am positively finger popping the old-fashioned way. And joining me on the other end of the internet is my host,
Leslie, and all I need are roses and strawberry yogurt.
There you go. There's a lot of yogurt talk in this episode. I mean, Devo's bringing some yogurt. Donna wants yogurt-flavored popcorn.
I know. Should I count that as ice cream or no?
Oh, she doesn't. I don't think she means TCBY here. I don't think she means frozen yogurt. I think she just means yogurt, like Yoplait.
That's such an interesting need or desire, rather. But okay, the 90s were a different time.
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, but that seems like a white person thing.
I've never needed yogurt from my partner.
I mean, no, I haven't needed that, and I haven't needed yogurt flavored popcorn. Like it seems like a weird thing, but I don't know. There's more to dig into in this episode that's not yogurt related. So maybe we leave the yogurt.
Fair enough.
Leave the yogurt where it is. So this week's episode is Season 2, Episode 9, Ashes to Ashes. Original air date September 19th, 1991. But before we jump into that, is there anything we need to touch base on from last week's episode, Wildfire, where Emily Valentine has fun at the gynecologist?
I feel like we spoke pretty in depth in that episode. I mean, we went over an hour.
And the Emily Valentine, unlike literally everyone else in this episode, is coming back. So we'll have more to discuss with her. This is our only chance to talk about the Ash family and everything that happens in this episode. So what is this episode about?
So the Walshes decide to join some neighborhood safety patrol thing. Mm-hmm. And by join, I mean they just install a security alarm system. I'm going to sigh a lot. That does not go well. But it's funny at the risk of harming others. And so along with that, we have a new family that moves in down the street, the Ashes, and they own a popcorn making company. Mm-hmm. And important to the story, they are Black.
Yes.
And
important to the story. It's the entirety of the story.
It's the entirety of the story. I just wanted to preface why I'm bringing up that they're Black. I'm not, like...
Mrs. Cooper?
Huh?
You're not Mrs. Cooper?
Exactly. Well, she didn't even bring it up.
No, she wouldn't say it.
You'll see.
Yeah, you'll see.
She's that woman who whispers people's races or like they're an illness, and it's not.
There's this... Man, I didn't anticipate talking about NYPD Blue today, but there's a few things I didn't anticipate talking about. But NYPD Blue, it was a phenomenal show that I'm sure you've barely seen. Like, you probably know it exists, but that's kind of about it. Dennis Franz plays Sipowicz, who is a problematic character.
That's what that name is.
Yeah, Sipowicz.
He comes up on Friends.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean... NYPD Blue was groundbreaking and massive in the 90s in different ways than 90210 was groundbreaking and massive. But Dennis Franz's character was an alcoholic and a mess of a human being, and also a pretty big racist.
Oh, really?
And it was treated as something that, like, part of who he was that he had to learn to overcome, you
Mm-hmm.
know, over time. But there's a scene at some point where he does it more than once, but there's one specific episode I remember where when he's referring to the race of a perp or a skell or a suspect, what they had lots of names for, like they had lots of New York street lingo cop words in that show. But the skell was black or whatever, and he did this instead of saying it. Like he moved his hand down over his face as a way to like say that this person is black. And someone was like, "Why are you doing that?" And he goes, "Well, we do this so we don't have to say that." And they're like, "Why are you even doing that? Like, why is that? Why is that important? You know, like why do you need to call that out?" And
Yeah.
that's the Mrs. Cooper of it all. You know, like she doesn't. Mrs. Cooper saying, "Well, you'll see," is Sipowicz doing this. You know,
Yeah.
it's non out loud ways to say the thing that you're saying out loud.
And so on top of that, we
Mm-hmm.
have Brandon and Charisse Ash constantly, well, they get into a slight wreck
Yep.
because neither of them thinks that they should look both ways or look and see other cars coming in their direction. Spoiler alert, it was both their faults.
Yeah, they're
Um,
both bad drivers.
they're both bad drivers. You know why? Because they're teenagers, and that's why their car insurance is astronomical.
Yes.
Anyway, so they get into a wreck. They almost get into a few more near wrecks. They're fighting. Her brother wants to be the photographer for the newspaper. And
Mm-hmm.
then her boyfriend, who lives in, I almost said Inwood, but it's probably Inglewood.
Yeah, it's down. It's around Inglewood. Yeah.
Yeah. Back where they were in the rough part of town. And he makes an impromptu visit, and unfortunately, tragically, the neighborhood watch racially profiles him and attacks him.
Yep.
And then Brandon wants to make a story about it because he's like, the only way I can be a good journalist is to force you all to go through the things that you go through every single day so that I can write a good article for my school newspaper.
Yeah, it's the
And
fucking
that's what you missed on 90210.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Brandon drives down to Tamale Heaven and yells at a black person about how they're dealing with racism, which is exhausting. Um. So I had I have long had feelings about this episode, and it is. I just think it's a mess, but it is. This is maybe the prototypical they tried, Brandon fixes it episode. Because the intentions here are so clear.
Mm-hmm.
You can see. So this episode airs in September of 1991. And the Rodney King beating was, and I'm going back to get the date right, I'm pretty sure it's March of 91.
I thought the beating was in June.
No, it's earlier than that. I don't think they could have put this. Yeah, March 3rd. So on March 3rd, 1991, Rodney King was pulled over by Los Angeles Police Department officers and just beaten within an inch of his life.
Yeah.
And as Devo points out, that's not the news. The news is that it was caught on camera.
Yeah.
And so that's March. Charles Rosen, a child of the 60s, a child of the civil rights movement, of the anti-war movement, sees this and says, this shit is still happening. And I'm putting so many words into his mouth, and I don't know this man, but this really feels like what this is.
Yeah.
This happened in the city where I live. This is wrong. I have a show set in this city, present day. How do I not address this? If I'm putting out a show that is socially conscious, that wants to talk about real issues that teenagers face in the 1990s, how do I not talk about this?
Yeah.
So that's what this episode is. It's an effort to have that conversation, to expose this reality to all of America. And let's be honest, mostly white America, because that's the audience for this show.
Yeah.
So it's clear that that's what he's trying to do here. And so it's very hard for me to just shit on the whole thing. You know?
Yeah.
Because the intent is so clear. The problem is that you have a show that's just about white people. And so how do you tell this story in a way that's not about the white people?
Well,
And
it go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just think it begs the question, because we have a lot of episodes across the spectrum of TV history that do stuff like this. And very special episode type shit, and it's pivotal at the time, and we look on it now, and so it begs the question, like, is it better to do it briefly and possibly wrong, or to not do it at all?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like you have to try.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we learn, and that's what we're forgetting in today's society, because people get so, I mean, myself included, we get so scared of having these conversations because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to say, I mean, still be conscientious of what you're saying, but if you never say anything, if you never have these conversations, if you're never willing to take risks in your art, then you're never going to learn.
Right. And, here's why this episode, I think, is tough for me to talk about. Remember that scene in, after Robinson Ash III yells at Brandon for being a racist and a user?
Yeah.
And Brandon is sort of unpacking this in the car with Brenda.
Unpacking it is a nice way to put it.
Yeah, well, that's what he's doing. He's doing it in a super self-defensive kind of way, but that's what he's doing. He's processing. And Brenda says, promise you won't get mad, after he asks if she thinks he's racist. And she says, if you didn't think there was a kernel of truth, by the way, good popcorn pun there, Bren.
Yep.
There was a kernel of truth to what he was saying, you probably wouldn't be so angry. So it hits a little close to home. And I think that that's part of why I have trouble with this episode, is that it shows how much I'm like Brandon.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't have experience with these things in real life, the way that Brandon doesn't. Brandon, I don't live in a rich neighborhood. I live in a pretty diverse neighborhood of Chicago, to be honest. Chicago is a very segregated city, and my neighborhood is not that. And I love that. I think that's great. But it's not how I grew up, and it's not how Brandon grew up. So his experiences with any kind of issues around race are cursory. And his reactions to them are well-meaning, but thick-headed.
Yeah.
And so, and I look at, and I want to judge Brandon for being just kind of a dick. And like, he really does some shitty stuff in this episode. And, he may have to reckon with that in Worst Person of the Episode. But he's a white teenager in 1991 trying.
Which is more than most teenagers back then would have done.
And so when I want to talk about this, and when I want to talk about Brandon and Steve in one-on-one and the way that they are responding to race, I'm uncomfortable about it, because it's really hard to I'm the pot calling the kettle white. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's like there's too much of me inherent in that, and there's too much of you and me being two white people talking about this.
Yeah.
How like we're two white people talking about how this show full of white people talked about race.
Yeah. There's only so much we can offer to it. There's only so much truth. There's certainly only so much like epiphanies we can bring to
Right,
this.
right, right.
Like, obviously this is not our experience. We grew up in Indiana, and
Mhm.
like I went to a high school that where people were still shocked whenever we had any students of color, and like that's
Mhm.
so sad. We had to combine with another school to do a musical production of Aida.
Mm.
I won't go into all that problem, but they were like, you know what? We're okay with the ensemble being all white. We probably can't have Aida being white.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, at least they thought about it, but they had to outsource their color,
Ugh.
which is, I mean, again, they tried. You know.
They tried. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I think all that to say, like, maybe take some of what we say today with a grain of salt, but also like I think it's a good discussion that we're gonna have today, and that is worth having.
Well, and I think that it's like we can only be as honest as we can from our own perspective.
Yeah.
Like I can't have a different perspective than the one I have. I could want to broaden my perspective, but I have what I have at the moment. Right now I have what I have. And so the episode is clearly about the like it's clearly this happens all the time and you don't see it.
Uh-huh.
Kansas or Idaho or Indiana or wherever, middle America, you don't know that this is how it is.
Yeah.
And it this is how it is, and it's not just bad guys being pulled over and roughed up by the cops. Right?
Yeah.
It was important for them to in telling the story, because again, like if you want to tell this story, you have to make it smush up against our 90210 cast.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not this show. You can't put it in this show if it doesn't have anything to do with our characters. So you have to put our characters in the center of it in some way, which means you have to do this thing about the home security system, and you have to do this thing about the alarm not working, and that Mr. Whatever's dogs are too yappy. Like you have to put all of those pieces in place so that when Devo is in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong skin color, there are reasons for it that we understand as viewers of the show, because we've watched the progression of the storyline today. Like, oh no, this thing happened. Oh no, what bad luck, right?
Yeah.
Like that this kid got caught up in this. And that's kind of the point. Like, it's not always somebody being pulled over and like they're resisting arrest and the proper amount of force was used. Like, and as we have seen, because it's 30 plus years later and this hasn't gotten better,
No.
that it's anybody. It could be anybody who's not white.
Yeah.
So they put it in that context and give us all of that so that the episode is about, listen up, middle America. This is how it is for people. Not you, but people who look different than you have a different experience of the world. And it's eye-opening for people in Indiana. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But people in Indiana who haven't been listening to NWA since 1988. right?
Hi.
But not high. Like I listen to a
No,
lot
I
to
know.
straight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, it's for people who haven't watched Boys in the Hood or any other or Do the Right Thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not set in California, but it's tackles the same issues in Brooklyn in 1989, 2 years
Yeah.
before this. So it's meant to be eye opening, but it's that thing where when you've got kids and they ask you simple questions about complex issues in order to break it down enough that they understand it, you almost have to get to the point of lying to them.
Oof.
You know what I mean? Because it's too complicated to say
Yeah.
to give all of the reasons why a thing is like it is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what you have to do is you have to try to strip away a lot of that nuance because they can't understand it. They're too little. They don't get like fine details and nuance of things. So you have to get down to the Civil War was started over slavery. You
Yeah.
know, you have to get it to a sentence, and that sentence leaves out so much information and so much context and so much history that it's almost a lie. Now, that sentence is a bad example because the Civil War was, of course, fought over slavery. Like, that's when you boil it down, that's what it was. But I don't know if you had this experience. I had teachers refer to it as the War of Northern Aggression.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if it was necessarily referenced as the War of Northern Aggression. Oof.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they definitely loved talking about the fact that it was over states' rights.
Uh-huh.
And also that Lincoln, was okay if basically saying Lincoln, would have ended this war without freeing slaves
Freeing the
if
slaves.
he
Right.
could. And I'm like,
Right.
okay,
Right. And all
weird
of those
flex.
things, yeah, all of those things are part of that story. But in order to explain it to a fourth grader, you have to say it was about slavery. Or if you're like doing it wrong, it was about states' rights. You boil it down to a sentence, and
Yeah.
that's what you get in a TV show 45 minutes, 48 minutes, where you're trying to teach people who don't understand this stuff about this stuff without getting into like the real complicated pieces involved. And so it makes it almost a lie
Well,
because it's
and
so simple.
so to go along with, how difficult it is to explain these concepts to kids. Like when I was working as an after school teacher, part of my daily routine with them was reading, was reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a very privileged New York Upper West Side school. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to bring in some new books
Mm-hmm.
because I know I didn't get these books. I would guarantee they're not getting them either. And like,
Mm-hmm.
thankfully, we don't really have the book bannings happening here that are happening elsewhere. But
Right.
obviously, sometimes there would be questions brought up. And the thing is, kids are smart. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. Do we
Mm-hmm.
still have to cut it down to the simplest of terms for them to understand? Yes.
Yeah.
But they can handle it. And
Right.
and the thing is, you know, kids from different backgrounds are having to learn this stuff much sooner than white kids
Mm-hmm.
are.
Oh, for sure.
So like
Yeah.
if they can handle it, then I don't know why they
Right.
think white kids can't handle it. Like they
Yeah.
they're the ones who really need to learn it. But
Yeah.
I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
Um so
Um, yeah. It's the effort is correct. It's well intentioned, and the execution is what you get when you try to squeeze it into 45 minutes, and when you have to frame it from the perspective of the rich white kids because they're the only characters we know. You know, so but
They also, I may be jumping ahead a little bit, but I just thought it was odd and a little forced how they were. I mean, at least they were telling Brandon this and not like making a big show of it in front of Charisse, but going like, "This is really hip, Brandon."
Yeah, so that's a good segue. Let's
Okay,
let's
great.
let's use that to move into what this episode is really about. Because I think one of the things this episode is really about, it's not a story about this black family.
Mm,
This episode is really about white people encountering black people.
mm,
And that's what Kelly is doing in that this is very hip, Brandon. She is like, she's putting her own point of view on what's happening here, which is that this is very cool. It's a good look for you. It makes you look one way because Kelly's very much about that popularity, right? And the optics. We saw it when she ran his ridiculous campaign to be junior class president.
yeah.
But she's about the optics, and for her, the optics of this are so hip, right? Not only is Brandon dating a an objectively beautiful human being,
Yeah.
like
But
Vivica
they're
A.
not even
Fox,
dating.
right, but he brought her out like
Yeah.
as if it were a date, right? Like Vivica A. Fox is stunning.
Yes.
And so not only does Brandon have a hot chick, but she's very stylish. Like look at the outfit she's wearing. It is super 1991 stylish. Even the suit she wears to school, like
All
where
of her
she's gonna,
outfits.
yeah, but like she's driving, I don't know, an hour to school, like in that outfit. Best case scenario, it's wrinkly as fuck when she gets there. So like it's not a great choice like from that standpoint, but she is fashion forward,
Yes.
Charisse. And so Kelly sees hot, fashion forward, and she's black. Wow, Brandon, this is hip. This is very hip. And Steve sees it and says jungle fever. Because Steve has seen a Spike Lee movie. And Brandon has seen a Spike Lee movie because he said jacked. And Devo calls him on it.
Yeah,
Oh, I see you've been reading your Spike Lee playbook.
I didn't know. I mean, I should know at this point that most slang we use has been stolen or what is the word I want to use? Thank you. My assistant here has been
Yes.
appropriated
For sure.
from groups of color and then also queer groups.
Right. Yeah, of course. Because they're hip. We want to take the things from the hip people. You
I
know.
know. It's like, oh my god.
Yeah. And Brandon is encountering like this entire black family. And so is Cindy, and so is the neighborhood watch. Like it's not a like we actually get a couple of scenes in the Ash household without any of our characters, which is interesting. And
Uh-huh.
we get a scene at Tamale Heaven between Devo and his guy with the wings. I don't remember what that guy's name is. Um,
He was something.
yeah, that guy was. I feel like that guy was in a slightly different show.
No, he was. I was like, he's me when I finally get my next big thing or when I get the big thing. I'm going to be, because, he was like, I'm going to make this work. I'm on a
That's right.
big show. I'm going to make sure they remember me.
I got 3 lines, and I'm going to say all of them.
All of them. I will not
Yeah.
end up on the cutting room floor.
No, he was in this episode. But so we did have we had conversations that didn't involve our characters, which is great. And they were interesting and illustrative about the characters and what they want and like their outlook on the world.
Those were the
And
truest conversations.
yeah, I mean,
Like, I didn't feel like the black actors had to be a caricature of
right,
themselves in those
right.
scenes.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I think Devo was only being a caricature in the moment that he stepped up to the three gangbangers who were silently threatening Brandon. Um,
Existing.
right. Yeah. Uh, um, but I think it's like everybody in this episode, when they talk to the Ashes, which, by the way, this episode passes the Brandel test. Like, literally everybody
Yes.
talks to the Ashes, which is great. Like, but it's weird. I mean, the conversations are like you can call us the 3Ds.
The camera shot?
Uh huh.
I mean, I
Yeah.
guess in a way, I suppose it's to show how singled out a black person might feel in an all white community.
I mean, she's certainly there to be viewed by them.
Yeah.
And she very much is. And they all introduce themselves, and they all say something to her, and she says something back, and then the scene is over. Thank God that she talked to other people. But like, even the conversations that the Ashes are having in their house are about the white people encountering them, right? Like Richard Roundtree, it plays Robinson Ash Jr. Shaft, Richard Roundtree, which is amazing that they got him for this show, for this one-off episode. But his conversation with Charisse about the car accident and Jim's conversation with Brandon about the car accident are kind of the same. And Cindy's as well, which is what matters here isn't that you guys had a wreck. What
Yeah.
matters here are the optics of how we handle this moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're the Walshes, you don't want to be seen as antagonistic and unwelcoming and Mrs. Cooper racist, right? And if
Like,
you're the Ashes,
yeah.
you don't want to seem like the problem that some people in this neighborhood already think you are.
Yeah.
So it's like
the line that I'm so sorry, I forget Mrs. Ash's name, but when Cindy comes over and their first meeting, she mentions, Cindy mentions, of course, all the robberies that have been happening.
Right.
And then Mrs. Ash says, "Oh yeah, my husband just said it's a good thing all that happened before we got here." And Cindy's face, it's like, I mean, I felt it too, like, wait.
Yeah. Wait,
like,
this lady, wait, does this lady know there's racism?
I know.
Because she just said that out loud, like she knows there's racism. I don't know how to react to that. I am very uncomfortable right now.
Because of course, we'd like to think the joke is from, just, oh, I'm so glad none of our stuff is going to be taken. But
No,
the reality
that's not what it is.
I know, that's not what it is. The reality is they can't be blamed for it.
Right. But
they
they're
can't
about to
be accused. No, I know.
Yeah. And I mean,
kick Mrs. Cooper out of HOA.
Yeah.
I want to give a brief shout out to Cindy for playing it cool. I mean, other than that moment, but like for the most part, I feel like Cindy was a real one.
She tries, like that whole conversation.
Like they could have had her react to Mrs. Ash being black, but she was just going over saying hi, like, "Oh, cool, new neighbor." Although, again,
Right.
that could also be seen as like, "Ooh, Cindy doesn't see race," which is also a problem. Like,
yeah. So we were just talking about Mr. Ash, and the impression of the neighborhood and Mrs. Cooper, and the whole idea of white flight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like the idea that when black people move into a white neighborhood, white people move away, and the property values drop or whatever, and all this bullshit. there's a Public Enemy song called "Who Stole the Soul," and it's ostensibly about how like the record companies stole royalties from black musicians, coming up.
Yeah.
And like there's a point in this song towards the end. Why, when black moves in, Jack moves out? Come to stay, Jack moves away. Ain't we all people? How the hell can a color be no good for a neighborhood? Help. Straighten me out. Because my tribe gets a funny vibe. Saying I'm wrong for singing a song without solutions. All the dancers answer questions. That whole thing, come to stay, Jack moves away. Like that's the underpinning of this. And that this is from an album from 1990. Fear of a Black Planet, which is a great album.
Okay.
But that whole idea of integrating the neighborhood is threatening to the white people.
Yeah.
And Robinson Ash knows this, and he wants to make it seem like they fit in. Like, we are not something to be worried about, or not something to be excised from the community. We belong here. And part of we belong here is no Devo. Like, that guy doesn't belong here. He's not good enough to date you, Charisse. He's definitely not good enough to come to our house. But it's all about those encounters and the way that everyone is sort of anticipating those encounters. And even the Cindy encounter at her door with the welcome crock pot of casserole. Midwestern people bring you casserole, FYI.
Probably without any spices.
Salt? Is salt a spice?
We're known for not salting things enough, so...
Yeah. But even that conversation, I just waited for it to go wrong.
Yeah!
The entire time. I'm like, oh God, this is going to be so awful. And it wasn't awful, but it felt bad the whole time.
Yeah.
Because it felt like it was just going to be awful. And then she makes that, thank God this happened before we moved here. And then you're like, oh, she said that part out loud. Oh, that makes me feel so bad. I don't like it. I don't like to feel like reality is a thing.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a lot about those interactions and not the lives of the people involved in the story so much. But do you have something that this episode is really about? Because I do have something else that I wanted to get into at some point.
I mean, I think we addressed it early on. I think it's really about Rodney King. I feel like this is also a way for them to... I don't know how to explain this. I feel like this was their way of also being like, hey, if you liked this, there's also the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So that that like there are black people who live in in white communities. There are black people who do well. Like there Yeah, I don't know.
What though? We had that before. It was called The Cosby Show.
Oh wow. How early was Cosby Show?
1983. And before that we had the Jeffersons. They moved on up.
But shouldn't that tell you that we still have to reach middle America and let them know, like, hey, rich people of color exist?
Well, and also that, and here's the difference, this isn't a comedy.
Yeah.
Like, all those other things that we were just talking about, the Jeffersons, the Cosby Show, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, all those shows are 30-minute sitcoms. You could, and like Martin comes pretty soon after this. Not a show that I ever watched. I was not like the hugest Martin Lawrence guy, but like those shows were big, but they're 30-minute sitcoms. They're not dramas about the black experience in America in the 90s. And maybe you couldn't get a drama made. I think it's probably true that you couldn't get a drama made about, like, centered around a black family in an upscale, or it doesn't even matter what neighborhood. I don't think you could get one set in a poor neighborhood. I don't think it matters. I don't think you could have gotten it done.
Yeah, so I feel like I wonder if this was their way of saying, hey, if we, if we gave them an hour-long show, which,
I
I
mean,
mean, still technically we don't give them an
again,
hour because it's based around, we have to see our white characters.
right.
I don't know.
I mean, I think
But
that
there's something
again,
there.
I think it's they tried.
Yeah,
Like I think that that's part of what the effort is here. It's not just can we talk about these things. We probably need to talk about these things, but it's also, if this goes well, this is like the biggest show on TV. Not the biggest, but it's pretty damn big.
yeah,
Um, if this goes well, maybe we can turn this into something. And for God's sake, we've got Shaft in it. Like this guy is he's a star. Now this is 20 years after Shaft almost,
yeah.
but Richard Roundtree is still a name and still a guy. Um, so I think that the placing of this in chronological context, I think is important, right? Especially as it relates to Rodney King and all of that stuff,
Yeah.
because Rodney King happens in March, and Charles Rosen says we got to do this. We got to write this episode for season 2, probably sometime in May or June, right? And because the episode comes out in September, and turnaround times being what they are. But while the show's being written and probably shot and whatever, Boys in the Hood comes out.
Mm.
Comes out in the summer of 1991, and Boys in the Hood is a John Singleton, I think his first movie. I think that movie's creation and production predates the Rodney King beating. And,
okay.
it came out after, but obviously it had to have been written before all of that happened.
Yeah.
So it's not a reaction to it, but it is right for the moment, right?
Yeah.
Because it's about these subjects that we're seeing on the news, and it makes it very timely. And so Boys in the Hood stars Lawrence Fishburne and Ice Cube and Cuba Gooding Jr. And it's about life in South Central LA. And it's about the relationship between the kids in that area and the police and each other and the gangs and the desire to get out and all of this kind of stuff. And there's a line where Ice Cube, as Doughboy, he says he's complaining about like TV news coverage, which that's what we've got.
Yep.
Of the Rodney King beating, we've got TV news coverage, and he says either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. That's the thesis, basically, of the movie. This is what reality is here, and it's not being shown, so you don't know it, and possibly it's not being shown because you don't care, or because the TV doesn't care. And so, what I think that this episode is about a lot is that our you and me, middle America, white people's experience of this kind of story of like people who live in South Central LA or people who live in, predominantly black neighborhoods in major cities across the country. All we know about this is what we're shown or what we hear, right?
Yeah.
What we hear in music, what we're shown on TV, what we're shown on the news. The representations of these lives and events and issues, all we know about them are TV, movies, and music.
Yep.
And this episode is a part of that knowledge dump. It's a part of what we know. We know the Rodney King beating because we saw it on TV. Like a lot. We saw it on TV. We know Boys in the Hood because we saw that movie. We know this comes out in August. We see, this is another telling of this piece of the American experience that you and I are not experiencing in 1991 Southern Indiana. Also because you're 2 or whatever.
I was going to say, I'm nodding
Well,
along, but I was like, if I'm sure it was on the news, I guarantee you I wasn't,
no,
you know,
you were not conscious of it, but I
I was
saw it all the time. And then we're aware the next year of the riots that happened after the Rodney King trial. That the trial of the police officers ends in their like just blanket acquittal for doing anything wrong.
yeah.
And so we're watching all this happen on TV and in movies. And I don't think this movie or this episode is as much like Boys in the Hood as it is about a slightly different movie that comes out later in the year. Have you heard of the movie Grand Canyon?
No.
Okay, I like this movie quite a bit. It's Steve Martin in a dramatic role. It's
Ooh.
Indiana University's own Kevin Kline. Yeah, Danny Glover, uh, Alfre Woodard. Mary Louise Parker. Like it's got a great cast. You know, it's got a great cast. Stance with a Fist is in it.
Kevin Costner.
No, not Kevin Costner. Mary, President Roslin.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, President Roslin. I don't know. Anyway, she's in it.
Cool.
But there's it's set in Los Angeles in 1991, and Steve Martin's a filmmaker. He gets carjacked and shot, and has to examine all of his because he does a lot of violent movies, and he's like, am I part of this problem, perpetuating violence or whatever? Kevin Kline is a guy who I don't even know what his job is, but he was leaving a Lakers game, and in the 90s the Forum was in Inglewood. That's where the Lakers played, and so he's driving surface streets to get back home, and his car breaks down. White guy, broken down car in the hood. And the only thing that saves him is he calls a tow truck, and Danny Glover is the tow truck driver. And Glover puts his car up on the thing and goes to the guys who are trying to carjack him and is like, look, his car is on my rig. Now it's my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to need you to ask you to let us go our way here.
Yeah.
And the kid says, if I don't have this gun, are we, how does this go down? And Danny Glover's like, if you don't have the gun, we're not having this conversation.
Yeah.
And he saves him. He gets him out of the bad neighborhood, and they become friends. And Kevin Kline is like, I have to make this up to you. I know this woman. I think you'd be great together. And so he introduces her, sets her up with a date with Alfre Woodard. And the two of them go on this date. And at the end, he's like, they're talking to each other about how they know this guy. And they're both like, I barely know him. And one of them is like, I wonder what he thought we would have in common. And then Danny Glover, I don't remember who says what. One of them says, maybe we're the only two black people he knows. And they both start laughing because they're like, that's clearly the case, and it turns out that they're perfect for each other. It's great. They have a life together and all of this kind of stuff. But that movie is about white people encountering black people in some way. And then the other part of it is that Steve Martin says this line in this movie that I love, and I think it applies to our understanding here a little bit. He says, that's your problem. You don't see enough movies. All of life's riddles are answered in the movies. And I think, I think that's wonderful and poetic. But I also think it's the only way we see these things. It's our only knowledge about this kind of story. And this story is a Grand Canyon story. It's like, these are the only black people that this white kid knows. And here's and this is the other thing that I think this episode is mostly okay until Brandon starts browbeating people to write a newspaper article.
Exactly. I have written down, Brandon forces the Ashes to combat racism so he can be a justice warrior.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
all of
because
this is for a school newspaper.
it is, yeah, but it's important. God damn it!
He's like, I need to expose this. To who, Brandon? I mean, yes, like, thankfully, your classmates are going to read it, but at what cost? You're forcing these people to go through something that they're like, I mean, the son, Robinson? Rob?
Yeah, Ash the Third.
Yeah, Robinson Ash III. He says they came from the hood, so they've probably seen some shit. They've probably encountered this. I'm sure the parents have had to code switch for police
Sure.
or to get this house. Do all kinds of things because of their race.
Right.
And Brandon, who is like, I have to expose this. People must know. It's like, you're forcing the people who already know it to go through it.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk. They don't want to talk to you about it.
That's it. That's really it. And they've asked you 100 times to let it go. And
but now that you've risked your life.
Yeah. And that's where the whole thing fails for me, is at the end of the episode, who learned a lesson? It wasn't Brandon. It was Brandon taught the black people. Like, because of Brandon, Robinson Ash Jr. is letting Charisse hang out with Devo a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, that's the person who learned the lesson were the Ashes.
And they didn't need to learn.
And that's so fucked up. Like a lot of times what I'll like the thing that I say about race in 90210 frequently is a black person shows up, teaches them a lesson, and leaves. And that's kind of what's happening here, because guess what, guys? None of the Ashes are coming back ever again. I know.
It's almost like the writers are Brandon, and they're using the Ashes.
A little bit. I mean, again, I think that Charles Rosen wanted more. Like, he wanted to be able to pitch a hour-long black show or an hour-long drama about a black family. Not a sitcom, but that wasn't going to get made, and he knew it, and this is maybe kind of the best he could do with it. But I mean, it's the show is Brandon's article, and the people who learned something in this episode are not. They're not the white kids. It's the black family that is now better for having met Brandon Walsh.
Who's a nice guy.
Exhausting. He's a nice guy. His mom tells him so.
When he said, I'm a nice guy, I checked out.
Right. Yeah.
I left my body for a minute.
Yeah. This is a tough one. It's a tough episode for me. And it also sticks its finger in my eye for one of the things that drives me the most crazy. And we've talked about it a little bit, but one of the things that this episode is really about is the way that photography doesn't work. This isn't how people take pictures. It's not how pictures work. So this episode starts out with Robinson Ash III taking pictures of everybody. Well, not everybody, just the people in the show, just the actors in the show, until it gets to the band, and then he takes some pictures. He takes pictures of Donna and Kelly and Steve and Dylan and Brenda, and those pictures all make sense because they're all sitting roughly together, and he's standing in one place taking these pictures. But then all of them appear fully printed on Andrea's desk half a second later. Not how photography works in 1991.
Not how any of this works.
No. And then he's taking pictures of the band, which, again, all of that makes sense. They're all from a specific point of view. But then you see at least 3 different times where Robinson's camera takes a picture that it couldn't possibly take. Yeah. And those are they're one-on-one conversations between two characters where he gets face shots of both of them seconds after the other one. So you and I are talking, and he's standing over my shoulder taking your picture. Snap. And then he runs around behind you before I say something and takes a picture of me. Snap. And those show up on TV like that's something he did. You can't do that.
Nope.
Like, he would have to be bouncing back and forth like a leprechaun, taking pictures.
Colin Creevy couldn't even do that. Take that many photos.
No, Colin Creevy could not. I mean, thank God no basilisks were involved in the filming of this production. But then he does the same thing at Tamale Evan with Brandon and Devo. Just jumping back and forth, getting the pictures. And then he does it at the end when Brandon and Charisse are parked going opposite directions on the street. That one, he has to jump across the street
into the other neighbor's house.
Yes, in order to take those pictures. Stop it. That's not how cameras work. Drives me crazy.
Yeah, no, it was way too much. And in those moments when it just felt like a way to insert him that was unnecessary. It's like you're making him look like a creeper.
Yeah, he's got the David Silver role.
Also, judging by how this family, again, with it being a black family, I'm sure they've told him, like, hey, you might want to be cautious about taking photos of every white person because some of them are probably going to get mad about it. And they'd be like,
yeah,
what are you doing on my lawn?
Right.
Like,
yeah,
I don't want you to run into any Karens, any barbecue Beckys.
I'm going to call the neighborhood watch on you.
Yeah. That broad Mrs. Cooper.
Oh, she's calling people.
She's peeking from behind the blinds on the phone like, they're outside, Janice.
That's right. One of I'll just let you figure out what they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, on the downside, last we see of the Ashes. On the plus side, last we see of Mrs. Cooper.
Thank God. Oh, thank
got rid
God.
of her. Yeah, this episode bothers the shit out of me, and here we are.
But it gave us the line. I didn't know David Silver wasn't black.
Where was that?
Oh my God! That's so Robinson Ash III is taking photos of them, and Steve's like, I don't know how I feel about this kid taking photos of us or something, being racist as usual. And or I think he said something like he's giving David Silver vibes, but like black. And then Dylan goes, I didn't know David Silver wasn't black.
Oh, I missed that. That's awesome.
It's like the Mean Girls equivalent of if you're from Africa, why are you white?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, David, as you're going to learn sooner than one would hope, David likes hip hop. David.
Oh, yay!
Listen, there's something going to happen next year where David raps, and it's my favorite episode of all time. It's another Brandon Fixes It episode. It's about race and David raps, and it's amazing. Oh my God. It's a season 3 joint that we're not going to get to for a minute. But
is it like when Dare people would try to like incorporate rap to make it cool? Like just say
no. David really means it. No, David is a rapper eventually.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If you say so. Me too.
I wish that I wasn't serious, but it's a real thing.
Dear.
So is there anything else we need to dig into on this one, or can we put ashes to ashes in our rear view?
Well, I'm glad I was wrong about someone dying. I mean,
right.
Hopes and dreams probably died. Innocence died.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you make your popcorn?
How do I make my popcorn? Okay. On the stovetop. We don't
Yes.
we're not a microwave popcorn family. Um, I do a little bit of oil and 3 popcorn kernels, and then you start the heat. When
Oh,
those 3 pop, you know that the oil's hot enough. Move the oil around, put the rest of the popcorn in with some butter and salt. Then all of that pops together, and then I apply a little more butter to mine, and Laura likes some of that cheese sprinkle.
nice.
So she gets the cheese sprinkle on hers. I get a little more butter on mine, a little bit of salt, and then we're good to go. How about you?
Wow. Well,
No
I'm gonna
Cajun
look.
flavoring here.
We would try it. Um, I was taught to make it on the stove, and
Mm-hmm.
so that is how I have always done it. Just a little bit of oil, or not just a little bit. Probably try to get a tablespoon on there. But I've always
Yeah.
been doing it just like I'll heat up the stove a little, heat up the pot, and then cover the entire bottom with kernels and let it go from
Mm.
there. But now I'm kind of curious to try it your way because we had a very specific pot that my
Mm.
dad swore made it the best. And I'm not sure if it's that or the oil that is making popcorn not as amazing to me as it once was. Um,
Mm.
I know.
I
Now you
know.
want popcorn. She loves
Valgember.
she loves popcorn. Come here. No popcorn right now. But anyway, yeah. So we're a stovetop household. I won't hear any of this microwave shit.
I mean, I've done microwave popcorn, but microwave popcorn burns real bad and can stink,
I mean, we've
like
all
in
been
ways that.
forced to do stuff we don't want to do. It's fine.
That's true. Yeah. Um, all right. So, what does this episode make you nostalgic for, other than your dad's popcorn?
Ah, I just realized this, but getting photos developed. I used to
Mm.
spend not all of, but a lot of my saved allowance I would use to develop my photos,
Hmm.
at Walgreens over the summer and like put together photo albums or scrapbook.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did. And I
Nice.
miss,
Nice.
you take them in and you leave for a few days.
Yep.
It's weird now to say a few days, like,
I know. It was. It was a few days.
and then you get a call saying, "Hey, your photos are ready." Oh, great!
Yep. Let's see if they turned out.
Hell, I remember, obviously after summer or after any vacation trip, my mom would take them in and then come back with like, the film in there too. And I used to think it was so weird that they would give you film along
Yeah.
with the photos. I'm like, what do you need this for?
Yeah. If you ever want to get them printed again.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that part.
Yep. Yeah. That's why you get the negative, so that in case you needed to get them printed again, you've got that original, and you can get them printed instead of copying the photo.
Yeah. So I miss
So
that.
nice. Um, Man, this doesn't make me miss much of nothing. Um, I guess it makes me nostalgic for a time when this episode would have seemed deep.
Mm,
Where it would have seemed like this was really shining a light on something.
yeah.
Which is like being nostalgic for my own ignorance a little bit.
I kind of get it.
You know,
Like, knowledge is power, but ignorance is bliss.
right?
And I'm, I think I can speak about this is all encompassing. Like, it's great that we have the ability to know the things we know now, to have
Hmm.
access to the things we know now. It's also heavy. It's also a lot. But
Yeah,
some people have been forced to carry it a lot longer than we have. So
yeah. And I
it's
mean, I
developing
think
new
I think
muscles.
I think part of the nostalgia is being nostalgic for having your eyes opened.
Yeah.
And which like still happens like constantly. I'm constantly learning new things. I'm constantly seeing things in a different way than I had seen them before, and thank God, because if I didn't, like, if you never look back on yourself and say, Jesus, I was a moron, that means you're still a moron. Like
Yeah.
you haven't learned anything since the time when you were a moron. And, in 10 years, I'll look back at now and go, geez, I was a moron. And that's, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. You're
So,
supposed to keep learning and evolving.
yeah. And like this episode is case in point because it's always bothered me as an episode. But I don't think I could have had today's conversation about it 2 years ago. Like my reaction to the episode was different then. I was still bothered by it, but
Yeah.
differently, So I'm okay with where I'm at with this now. But it is like that feeling of like, oh shit, that's kind of deep. Like
Yeah.
nostalgic for that feeling, I guess, a little bit. So, who for you is the Steve Sanders Memorial worst person of the episode?
Oh God. I'm gonna say the Neighborhood Watch dudes.
Okay,
They
the
didn't need
90-second guy,
Yeah,
or
they
the
didn't.
or the cops that
Oh no, the
roughed up
cops.
Diva. Oh,
The
okay.
they were. I mean, yeah, they were cops, but also they're Neighborhood Watch. I feel about them the way I feel about TSA people. I'm like, I know you feel like you have power, but also you don't because you're an asshole. So
Right. Careful, you're going to want to get on a plane too.
listen,
Just don't piss off the TSA people is all I'm saying.
I have wigs.
Oh, there you go. That's important.
Yeah.
Sneak your way on.
But yeah, I'm gonna say those guys are the worst.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against the abuse of power guys.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say Brandon
Oh,
because
that's fine.
I just the confrontation with Devo at Tamale Heaven in the parking lot. It sucks so hard. Like watching Brandon yell at someone because they're not reacting to racism the way he thinks they should sucks so hard. And that was like my primary takeaway from this episode before looking at it today. And like fully contextualizing the Rodney King piece of it and sort of the writer's intention and all that kind of stuff. But God, it is so hard for like I can't take Brandon lecturing people about how they're supposed to feel about the thing he just learned about.
Yeah.
Like Devo's been living this shit. Like he just told you what his family life is like, what his brothers are like. One brother's in prison, one brother is hooked on crack. Like his mom had to beg for money to get a cab to come get him out of a neighborhood watch jail or wherever he was.
Yeah.
Like this is a guy who he doesn't need your input, Brandon.
No.
None of us do. But God, you are forcefully screaming at him about it. And you just suck.
Yeah.
You didn't give him that black eye, but my Lord, are you giving him a tongue lashing?
Probably an ulcer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. This guy's eating a lot of tamales. I think that ulcer may have gotten a start already.
Oh,
Tamales
God.
are great, but I'm not sure it's good for you if you're going to eat them all day, every day.
Honorable mention for the worst person, Mrs. Cooper.
Oh, Mrs. Cooper's awful. Yeah.
Take away her phone because I don't trust what she's going to do with it. Just kick her out of HOA. She's a problem.
Yeah. And, I guess, see you never, Ashes.
Bye.
Sorry to say. I know.
Yeah, Ember's
Ember's
mad about
right.
it too. I know.
All right, so I think we did it.
We did it.
All right, join us next week, Cheesemeisters, when we get into season 2, episode 10. Necessity is a mother. And I don't know. Have you read the synopsis?
I think I read enough. We meet Iris.
We meet Iris. Yep. So we've been hearing that Iris is here. and that she's total Fruit Loops and listens to wind chimes, which apparently is
The
damning.
weird thing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Listen, if you're a
So
parent, if you're an adult, anything you do out of the norm to kids is weird. I had so many kids ask me why I had like wardrobe choices that I made all the time, and I would be like, because I can.
that's right.
That's why I
Because I'm a
wore it.
grown up.
I'm a
You
grown
know
up.
why? Because when you're a grown up, you don't need a birthday to eat a piece of cake. You can just eat a piece of cake if you want to. It's fine. That's what happens when you're a grown up. You can listen to wind chimes.
Yeah.
But next week, season 2, episode 10, Necessity as a Mother. Not nearly as anxiety inducing in me as Ashes to Ashes. So until then, Cheesemeisters.
Bye.
Bye.